Welcome to the Paging Dr. Mom podcast. Anyone else feel like they're on call 24/7? If so, you're in the right place. Today, we are so fortunate to host Dr. Susan Landers. Susan raised 3 children while practicing medicine full-time. Her children presented her and her physician husband with many challenges over the years, including trials and struggles which she considers typical for all working mothers. She wrote a book about her experiences, So Many Babies, My Life Balancing a Busy Medical Career and Motherhood. We are so excited today to have Susan Landers, MD, NICU with over 35 years of experience, who wrote the book, So Many Babies. I have so many babies here, and any pediatrician can appreciate that this looks like a Harriet Lane, all tattered and tagged and highlighted. Susan, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to chat with you today.
Well, I think it's so timely because your book, So Many Babies, it's so timely because I think not just doctor moms, but all moms are living in a high-stress time right now, right? We don't have solid answers to all the questions we have. There's so much we can't control. There's so many factors that go into every day just to survive right now for moms. And so your book, to me, it's all about taking on medicine and motherhood all at once, but it's about resilience and endurance and reassurance, really. It's such an honest look at motherhood and medicine together. And I'm so grateful for it. And I think it's time that we talk about it because I think it can help so many moms who have no interest in the NICU at all.
Oh, Julie, that's really sweet of you to say all those kind things about my book. I did want it to be reassuring for other working moms.
Yeah.
It's nothing else, but it's the way we all manage and we all share these similar challenges.
Yeah, to me, I really felt like it was kind of your love letter to other moms to forgive themselves. Mm-hmm. And through your own, we'll get into details, I'm excited to do that, but through your own honesty and your own authenticity and your own vulnerability, you really show moms that it's all going to be okay. No matter how deep and dark it gets, we're going to come out on the other side at some point. Nothing's going to last forever. And it's kind of like COVID, pandemics end, residency ends, fellowships end, not having control of your schedule ends. And I think you really give women hope through this book. And so I encourage everybody to listen today, but rest assured that even if you're not a NICU person or if that was gave you hives during residency like it did to me, that you will still get a lot out of the book. And if you don't mind, I'd love to start with the quote that you start with at the beginning of your book. I'll just start with a portion of it, but it's written by Anne Lamott. And it says, "The first and truest thing is that all truth is a paradox. Life is filled with heartbreak and beauty and many other things that are swirled together. Families are hard, 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 no matter how cherished and astonishing they may be. Remember that in all cases, it's a miracle that any of us specifically were conceived and born. Earth is forgiveness school. It begins with forgiving yourself, and then you might as well start at the dinner table." I love that because forgiveness to me was one of the major themes of your book, self-forgiveness.
It is. It is. I'm glad you picked that up because many of us grow up experiencing childhoods that are not perfect, that are struggles in one way or another. And we carry our notion of family and motherhood forward into our own families and our own motherhood based on how we were raised. And for people who were raised harshly or critically or without a lot of care, without compassion, raising children will bring out some bad things. Raising children will remind us of what we maybe didn't get in our childhood. And so I wanted to tell my early story, which was growing up in a family with a very harsh daddy and a mom who worked. And I thought that other women could probably identify with that because a lot of us struggle to be the best. We struggled to make good grades. We struggled to make straight A's and get in med school, be a doctor, get the best residency, get the best fellowship. And sometimes we don't know why we're struggling to do that, why we're seeking to be the best. It took me a long time, Julie, to figure out that I was seeking to be the best at the things that I attempted because I wanted praise from other people. I wanted acknowledgement for who I was and what I was capable of. And I bet a lot of physician moms feel that way. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's normal to grow up in a harsh childhood, but a lot of physician moms carry some baggage from their childhoods with them as they learn to be working mothers.
Absolutely. And you talk about that imprinting. You know, it's so powerful. Not only do baby ducks follow their mother duck and swim the same way and fly the same way, but humans do the same thing. And good and bad patterns can be taken into our own motherhood. And I mean, just to acknowledge what you accomplished, you grew up in the Deep South in the 50s and 60s. I would say you had little to no cultural nudge to pursue a career in any field, you know, based on what I read about, you know, your pecking order in the family compared to your brothers, let alone in medicine. And so I feel like your story is also phenomenal in that you were able to catapult yourself from, you know, kind of trying to get noticed to this world of top-notch academic medicine. You were at one of the top pediatric centers in the world at TCH and you know, while mothering 3 children, and we'll get into that in the twists and turns, but I mean, just the way that you carried yourself from where you started to where you got academically was just in and of itself a huge feat.
Well, thanks. It was, because in the 50s and 60s, women were expected to be wives and mothers. And the notion of women working outside the home, much less being professional or having careers, was really unusual. I was one of 18 women in my med school class of 160. That's how rare it was. Now you guys are 50-50. Half the class is women now because we've all discovered it's a wonderful profession. But I benefited from the feminism that was percolating up in the 60s and 70s because all around me in culture was saying, you can do it, you can do it, you can do whatever you want. And I had a mentor in a medical record librarian who
That's right.
had a master's degree. And she said, you can do whatever you want. You like biology, you want to be a doctor? Fine, go be a doctor. You can do it. And I had never heard that from my parents. I had to hear it from someone else. We do struggle to go in a certain direction for a profession for lots of different reasons.
And how interesting that you found a mentor that was a woman, but she was in medical records. You know, there wasn't anyone for you to attach yourself to go shadow. That was a physician in Charleston at that time that your family knew, because that simply didn't exist. And even your story about medical school and the way that you studied pre-med with a group of guys and you guys all kind of worked together and they all got into the big state school that you wanted to go into. And you truly felt like your grades and scores matched up to those, but that because you're a woman that you were likely denied admittance because of that.
I'm not sure. I didn't get into University of Alabama, so I went back to the Medical University of South Carolina. But I did study with all men in college, and all my friends in med school. Most of my friends in med school were men. And, you know, the early experience in medicine was everywhere we trained, there were mostly men.
Yeah, of course.
And I initially liked surgery. I'll tell you a cute anecdote. I don't remember if I put it in the book. I was on a surgery rotation, and this handsome, tall, in his 40s, cardiovascular surgeon was nicknamed Crow Bradham. Crow implying that he was harsh and pecked on people. And on rounds one day, he said, "What do you want to do with yourself, young lady?" And I said, "Oh, I want to be a surgeon." And he looked at me and he said, "That is not anything for ladies to do. You need to think of a different specialty." I am not kidding. He said that to me. He was serious.
In front of other people, too.
On rounds, yeah. Yes. I was so in love with surgery. and I had my eyes set on pediatric surgery. And that changed a little bit because of a boyfriend in med school, but that's neither here nor there. Neonatology worked out perfectly.
Well, so many procedures in neonatology and such a great opportunity to use your hands and do suturing and, all kinds of, I know you're a pro at arterial lines and from reading your book, and that was your favorite procedure. I told you I was hoping nobody needed an arterial line. That would be my idea of a good night since I do wellness. I think it's interesting just looking at your background and how far you came. And then, you surmounted all those challenges. And then here comes marriage and motherhood on top of getting past all that, right?
Right. So my perspective is a little different because I became a physician, was fully boarded before I ever met my husband and dated him and got married. I didn't have my first baby until I was 34 and had my last one at 40. But I had a lot of friends that were older mothers too, that had put off having babies until residency or fellowship. So that was really common back then. What's going on now with having babies in med school and residency was uncommon when I was training.
That meant the end of the road then, right? It's either or.
Right. I remember being asked, no, I probably didn't. It was for a job. I was asked for a job if I was going to have more babies. I was looking at a job somewhere in southern Missouri after Philip and I got married, and I can't believe we had one, and they were asking me, "Are you going to have more children?" Like it would be a big deal that you had a maternity leave. So,
yeah, it'd be a real big inconvenience for us. Is really what they were saying.
Exactly.
Which it would be, and for you too. But
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. And so, but you had finished your fellowship before you had your first baby, right?
Right.
And then you had your 3 kids and you were at this great practice and you were kind of in the zone and everything was kind of going well. And then your husband had an opportunity. You moved from Houston to Arkansas at that point. And so you had your 3 kids in tow. You're transitioning across the country. You got to find a house, schools, a nanny, a new practice, and kind of, keep everything together for your family in terms of, hey, I'm here for you because you're transitioning too.
You summed it up in a way that makes it sound easier than it was.
Way too easy.
I mean, 3 children, all under the age of 7, new house, new school, new neighborhood, new doctors, new job, new nanny, everything. And I thought I was doing okay, Julie. And I had started work a couple of months after we all moved in. And the night call schedule at my new job was horrible. But I kept doing it.
Because you did like 30 days straight, right?
Yeah. There were some rotations where we did 30 days in a row.
Yeah.
We had an old-fashioned division chief. The nights were punctuated within the 1 month on service. But it was a very brutal schedule. There were not enough neonatologists to cover all of the nurseries, is the simple fact of it. But I did it. And I had a good nanny, and my husband helped. And over the course of the first 6 months that we were there, so Laura would have been about 8 or 9 months old.
Your baby.
I was still nursing the baby, my 3rd baby, pumping my breast milk at work. No pump room in the NICU, very few breastfeeding NICU moms in this NICU. I brought that to that unit. Anyway, things kind of culminated in my being so stressed, so moody, so bent out of shape, couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I was just so unhappy, and I missed my friends. I would call friends and cry on the phone. I even called my pastor. I remember crying on the phone and praying with him one day that I was just so lonely and so lost. And about a week later, I was having lunch with a friend of mine, a critical care doctor, and saying, I'm just so miserable. I know I'm supposed to like this job. It's really better, and our house is beautiful, and the school is good, and the kids are happy, but I'm so unhappy. And she looked at me and said, I really think you're depressed. You need to see somebody. So I did see a good psychiatrist, and he diagnosed me with postpartum depression. because I was still within that window of, 1 year after having a baby. But I think it was all the major life stressors in addition to having had a baby. But the good thing about that episode of depression, and other mothers may identify with this, is it gave me an opportunity to really look at all the priorities in my life. I described to my psychiatrist that I thought of myself as the man on stage spinning plates, the guy that runs from pole to pole. He's moving his sticks around, keeping the plates spinning. He's running around, and if any plate wobbles, he runs over and spins it so everything stays in the air.
And anyone watching is on the edge of their seat because it's so precarious.
Yes, and I don't know if people have actually seen plates spinning, but it is a real thing, and you can keep 10 or 12 plates in the air. And I described my sense that I was doing that to my psychiatrist, and he laughed. And I said, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "Why don't you just take down some of the plates?" It was an epiphany for me. And so, you're doing everything. You're a physician, and you're in another medical school, and you are a good mother to your children, and you're doing your job, and you're finishing a paper and writing a grant.
One more plate doesn't seem like that big of a deal when you've got that many good plates spinning, right?
Exactly. And he helped me label all the plates, talk about the importance, decide which plates to take down. It was a wonderful process. And of course, the antidepressant medication helped as well. But over the course of about 2 or 3 months, I recovered from that depression.
Pretty quickly, I would say.
Yeah, it was quickly. I think I needed somebody to talk to since I had left all my friends behind in Houston. My husband was having such a good time.
He was in the catbird seat. He had the cush job and the great office and everybody fawning over him, and you're so great. And he had the good hours.
Yeah, the lesson there for professional women is if you and your husband are out of sync in whose job is going well and who's getting what they want and who feels fulfilled, it's a nightmare for your marriage. I mean, we really struggled because he was so happy in every way that I was so unhappy.
You were kind of equal and opposite.
We were not balanced at all. During that period of time, we were out of sync.
And I think what's interesting is, Susan, you shared, thank you so much for sharing about postpartum depression, because I know a lot of our listeners will have dealt with that or may deal with it in the future. And the answer is, it wasn't your baseline. It was triggered by, your plate getting so full and having so many of those full plates spinning, plus the 3 kids, and then having, going through the hormonal changes of just having had a baby, that there really was a solution there and you found it. But I think what's interesting too about talking about marriage is that you all had really sort of crisis-proofed your marriage in a way before you left Houston, before you went to Arkansas, because you had this great group called Heal the Healers. It was so special to you because you were with other couples that were medical, and it was I don't know if your pastor led it. I know there was like a Christian aspect of it. Maybe it was through your church. And even then, despite that, you still hit bumps in the road later that you knew might have been coming, or you had the training to kind of recognize. But even then, as a professional and as someone who had sort of this padding of, okay, Heal the Healers, we're going to sit around a circle and talk about this, it still overtook you and your husband at a time when things were really stressful for you and going really well for him, and you had to deal with that.
Exactly. But Healing the Healers, as you said, was a group of couples, all medical, whom a Methodist minister turned into a psychiatrist had started.
Good combination
and
his
there. Notion, yes. And his notion was that medical couples, probably physicians in general, but medical couples in particular, give too much to their careers, their profession, their healing practices, and not enough to themselves or their marriages. And so his notion was, if you can get these people to sit around in a group and share their feelings about patients, about children, about parents, about their marriages, that they become better doctors, better healers. And we were in that group for 2 years. We met every other Sunday evening for 2 years. And I cherish every one of those meetings. I learned so much about myself, about marriage, about talking to patients, talking to parents, talking to other physicians. It was a wonderful experience. And I've really thought a lot about that notion of physicians supporting one another. Mm-hmm. And I think like what you're doing with your podcast is exactly that. Physicians telling stories that touch other physicians, especially moms, that teach them ways to take care of themselves. Fill up their cup is really a simplification. But it's a good notion because we all have to learn how to take care of ourselves and take care of our marriages. Sure, we take care of our kids. We all do that. We do a great job of that. And we do a great job of our practice. And then maybe our marriage. And we always put ourselves at the very bottom of the list. That group taught me to put me higher up on the list. We used to have to report every other Sunday what we had done for ourselves in the previous 2 weeks, whether it was a bubble bath, whether it was running in the neighborhood, whether it was buying yourself flowers on Friday afternoon, if you were off for the weekend, whether it was having coffee with a friend, whether it was a date night with your husband. We had to come into our group and report what we had done that was positive for ourselves and our marriages. Isn't that a great idea?
Yeah, I love it. And, I think what you're saying to women, first of all, is, you're not alone. And I've seen you on your platform say, you are not alone. We are in this together, and come and let us help you find solutions. And in your book, you really were so candid about the solutions you found for yourself. I mean, not only cognitive behavioral therapy, which we already talked about, but self-imposed timeouts, sewing Halloween costumes and doing your crewel work. And eventually, you just mentioned it, sending yourself a monthly bouquet. And I thought that was so sweet. So from these other women, you were learning self-care and coping skills that really, they were actionable ideas to heal the healer. And that, you explored the fine line between the complete devotion to your patients, which is clearly you had that, but also the insidious way a medical career can overtake your marriage and your family life. And so really putting out some options for women, whether it was like your support group, Heal the Healers, or like you said, exercising. And then you also get into delegating. What plates can you take down and hand to somebody else? And so I think your book really offers so many of these practical ideas. And I mean, nobody remembers lists of things that are generic, but they remember stories, and you tell it in a way that it's a story. And like, you at one point you say, I resorted to sending myself flowers once a month because I needed it, and I don't think any woman's going to forget that. So I love that you share that. And it was such a great way just to give an example of how you coped and what you had to do. Talking about motherhood and your forgiveness of yourself and how you thought of yourself, and were you doing a good enough job? I mean, I think that you navigated medicine and motherhood in such a skillful way, but that you didn't give yourself credit at first for that. And you almost had to be convinced that you were a good enough mom. Yet your children and your husband presented you with this darling little brooch with homemade flourishes like glitter and a little glued pin on the back that was super mom.
Yes.
Do you still have it?
I do. I do still have it.
That's so sweet.
That notion of being a super mom is something many of us struggle with. I started out as a pediatrician, neonatologist, reading all the books, reading all the child development books and the parenting books. And I intended to be a perfect mother. And a lot of us start out that way. And then reality hits.
Right.
And then you've got the baby and you've got to go back to work and the maternity leave is over. And then there are the night terrors, or then there are the tantrums, or then there's the breastfeeding problem, or whatever happens. And we're like, oh my God, I can't believe I can't handle this. We're so used to fixing everything as physicians. We're so used to being in control, being smart, knowing the answers, that when our children throw a punch to us, it really takes us off guard. Putting myself in timeout was a godsend. My son was acting kind of dorky, and not dorky, that's not the right word, peculiar at age 3. He would punch other kids in the eye. And
it sounded like some impulse control stuff, which a lot of boys, by the way, have.
Yes. And I was a new mom. And so I worried that, that there was something wrong with him. And at home, he didn't do it very much with us, but he did have other impulsive behaviors. And I would snap at him if I was tired. But when I snapped at him, the psychiatrist that I was working with at the time said, you need to put yourself in timeout. That was an idea that was proposed to me. And I used to do that. I used to say, stay right here. I'm going into the sunroom to sit for 3 minutes. I'll be back and we'll finish this.
That's powerful, because not many of us really have the self-control to do that. But through your therapy, you learned a new habit. And it was very different from how you grew up, which there was corporal punishment and all kinds of yelling. And you shared that in the book, and how you were able to turn that around, I think, is remarkable as well.
Thank you. It took a lot of effort. When you grow up in a household with yelling and hitting, it's very second nature. It's very right brain to resort to those old patterns. And once you become a mother, once I became a mother, I learned that it was really easy to kind of fall back on those old tapes in my head. And I had to really work hard. It was easy to not hit my children. As a pediatrician, I just would never hit or slap my children. But I did some yelling, and every time I did, I regretted it. And I would say to myself, we're going to change this. I'm the generation that's going to change. I'm not going to yell at my kids. And I would still do it. And so even when we try to break those old habits, they do come up, and it takes a lot of effort. And when you're tired, when you've worked 60 hours a week, when somebody's sick, when your husband is having a great time and you're having a hard time, it's real easy to fall back on those old tapes in your brain. So therapy helped me a lot during that time as well. When I was becoming a mother, I started out telling you that I wanted to be a perfect mother. It took me about 10 years, really, to figure out that I was a pretty good mother, that I had skills and I could handle tantrums and I could handle teachers and I could handle play dates and birthday parties and all that stuff. And all the discipline was going fine. So about 10 years to feel like I was really a pretty good mother.
It was almost like your training, like med school, residency, and fellowship. It was like, in that about 10 years?
Very similar.
To where you felt like you were an attending parent,
4 plus 6. Yeah, I was finally an attending parent. That's a great analogy. But then the next 10 years was devoted to really owning that I was a good enough mother. I knew that I had good skills as a mother. I knew that I could handle a busy, stressful job, but I wanted to feel like I was a good enough mother. And as each child had new challenges, I would sort of regress back to, oh, why can't I handle this? Why isn't my kid perfect? What have I done wrong? How have I caused this? And most of the things my children went through were not my fault. They were just normal childhood developmental things.
100%,
and
of course.
And I tended to, heap it on myself, blame myself. Again, old triggers, old habits, blame myself. I must have done something wrong. My husband was wonderful. He would say, quit beating yourself up. You are a good enough mother. You are here with them when you're home. You are a good enough mother. And I slowly came to believe that I was a good enough mother. And by the time the younger two were through their teenage years, I felt like I really was a good enough mother.
And I believe that because in the book, you can feel the resistance against yourself, and then you can feel the release of the tension when you finally believe it. And you're writing in a way that you can tell you believe it. And I think a couple of prominent themes in your life and in any doctor's life and any mom's life are teaching and quality improvement, right? And I think it's amazing to look at how you, through your career, you know, when you went to a new place with outdated practices or a place that wasn't into breastfeeding, I mean, you end up pioneering a grant-funded mother's milk bank and you eventually, you know, were leading the section on breastfeeding at the American Academy of Pediatrics. So you were always doing quality improvement. And that was no different than at home when you had teaching and quality improvement through accidents that happened or behavioral issues or unfathomable nanny emergencies. And then there's just, we might want to talk about that if you want to share it, but in just the teenagers in general. And I think you had this formula to how you approach that in the NICU, and it didn't always exactly go as planned at home. And that was frustrating in a way. And you thought, well, I read the book. I did what it said. I went from point A to point B. Why did this not click this way? And of course, that's human nature because our kids don't read those textbooks. And each kid needs their own textbook, right? Because even your own 3 kids were so different. I love the way you explain your 3 children, and you have so much love for each of them. And they're all so very different. And they've all had different challenges to this day. And you really share a lot about that.
I think a lot of physician moms expect themselves to be good moms because I know that they expect a lot of themselves just by going through medical school and residency and fellowship training.
Right.
You can't do that without expecting a lot from yourself, without finding your own personal resiliency. And so, of course, we carry that into our family life. We expect ourselves to be good mothers. And sometimes we may be too hard on ourselves because our children are just going through phases. My son was impulsive, and we had him worked up for ADHD, and he didn't have it. And it turned out he was kind of into computers and nerdy things and actually did fine when he had a teacher who could let him work with computers, and when he had an orchestra teacher who taught him how to play the stand-up bass. He's very musical and very camera and computer oriented and grew up to be a cinematographer, and he's very successful. Your children are the way they are as children, and you have no idea really how they're going to be as adults. That I didn't think much about that when I was in the midst of it, but I can guarantee you, Julie, that your 4 kids will be something amazing that you might not have even thought about yet.
Isn't that fun? Just to kind of relieve yourself of the pressure of figuring that out, because they are who they are and they have their temperament. And I mean, you can look at your 3 kids, Susan, David, Ann, and Laura, and how different they all were. You talked about David. Ann was sort of your type A firstborn girl. She was on the swim team. She even breastfed like a shark, you said, and it sounds like she swam like a shark. And then Laura was sort of your easy baby who had maybe some other problems, you know, when she got to school. But as a baby, she was super easy. You know, each of your kids sort of did a bait and switch on you in a way.
I want to mention one thing about Anne. When she was a teenager, she came home from summer camp. She had been a counselor there, and she announced to me that she was too fat and that she needed to lose weight. She probably weighed about 110 pounds at that time. And of course, she was skinny. And
she was an athlete.
An athlete, yeah. She was a butterfly swimmer. And she started dieting. And for the whole first semester of her junior year, you know, this is SAT prep, AP classes, captain of the swim team. good student, mostly A's. She stopped eating. And it took us a while, I'm embarrassed to say. It took us a couple of months to figure out that she had stopped eating.
Because she would tell you she was eating at Susie's house,
School,
and Susie's mom said
Jenny's
she's
house,
not, or
yes.
Jenny, yeah.
Yeah. Jenny's mom said, Susan, she's not eating. And I went, holy cow. Of course, I'd taken her to the pediatrician because she complained of indigestion, and the PD prescribed antacids and reassured me. So a word to the pediatricians out there is we always have to think about eating disorders, especially for a high-risk adolescent like my daughter was. Long story short, we found a therapist and a nutritionist who she loved and loved working with. And we watched our daughter go through a refeeding process. And in 6 months, she was totally back to normal, still swimming, had regained all of the 15 pounds that she lost. I am convinced to this day that the reason that she recovered so well and has never had a relapse is because we caught it so early. 2 moms talking on the phone made the diagnosis.
Right. And you're kind of blaming yourself for catching it so late, but honestly, 2 months is pretty quick. And you had the wherewithal as a pediatrician to call out for help. And I think that's one of the things that you were talking about. When our own kids aren't following the textbook, we're almost ashamed or embarrassed to say, well, I can't even figure this out in my own house. But you didn't do that. Your instinct was to, I need professional help. And you wrote that several times. I knew I needed professional help, even though you were a professional and probably had enough knowledge to deal with it on your own. But you were wise enough to have a third party involved so that it took out the battle between you and your daughter, which would be the number one thing you wouldn't want to do with an eating disorder, is have it be between you all. So I just think it's a great lesson to us as physicians reading your book and seeing, yeah, we all have problems in our families. Like Anne Lamott said, it's hard, hard, hard. Maybe a few more hards in there. But, I love that you had the sense, the good sense, the common sense to say, I can't do this myself. I am her mother. I am not her doctor. I'm going to get her some help. I think she ended up becoming an ICU nurse later, right?
She did. She's a pediatric ICU nurse.
So you guys can talk shop too.
And we do. And she's working on her master's because she wants to be a nurse practitioner. So she's very good at what she does. Yeah, she was a supervisor and a charge nurse within the first year of moving from Texas Children's to Dell Children's in Austin. Yeah, she's great. And she loves the critical care. She
was spotted early on as a leader and then is continuing to follow in Mama's footsteps in a way. That's so exciting. Okay, Susan, I really can't tell you how refreshing your book is, because it's just such an honest and vulnerable and raw account. And I encourage any mom who has struggled, whether you're a doctor or not, to read the book, because I think it's really lovely to see how you forgive yourself. I mean, flat out, like, I am not just a good enough mom, I am a super mom. And by the end of the book, I think you're believing that, and I'm believing, I think you're Wonder Woman. I've told you that, all that you dealt with and all that you handled and all the incredible policies and accomplishments that you achieved through all these things. I mean, you really are a person who looks at problems and you find a solution and you execute. And it's easy to look at problems. It's fairly easy now to find solutions because we can Google anything, but executing, that's another story. And I love the way that you've already given a few examples today of how you executed. And so for women who have trouble with that, there's coaching, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's professional help in many different forms. But I think you've given some real concrete examples. And so favorite question that I get to ask is your paging Dr. Mom moment, a moment when either you were overcome with emotion when medicine and motherhood kind of collided, or a funny story that you'll never forget, or just anything that comes to mind when you think of paging Dr. Mom. When you had all those plates spinning, what was a time that you could not forget?
I had a patient in the intermediate care unit who really should have still been in ICU. It was a kid with BPD. He or she was 6 months old. And he crumped one day, probably got RSV or something, and I couldn't leave. And it was the day of the Mother's Day tea at the preschool.
Yes. Only mom can go to the Mother's Day tea in our mind.
Right. I know. And I paged my husband and said, my kid's crumping. I've got to intubate, take her over to the ICU. I can't leave. Please go for me. Bless his heart. He went to the Mother's Day tea.
This is your husband.
My husband, the only man, sat down at the little round table and, drank juice and ate cake. And I think it was David that this happened with. And David presented him with, the 2 handprints and a cute little saying about how I love my mom. Yes. And my husband accepted the gift. And I thought I was going to die inside as a mother.
And this is your first child.
First child. And I look at that picture now and I think I have come so far because David didn't have a clue that it was supposed to be his mother.
He was like famous. My dad's here. I'm the only one.
Right. And so even though I was so injured, my husband was nice enough to do it. David could have cared less. His teacher probably thought it was really cute.
Yeah. All the moms definitely thought it was cute. And we're giving your husband like major props as husbands get for doing stuff like that.
Yes. You probably want me to tell the other story about when Anne was 4.
If you want to.
My real paging Dr. Mom. Terrible moment. I was going into the ICU for a 24-hour shift. And Anne was 4 and she was sick with strep throat. And I had already talked to the nanny and the other 2 kids were off at preschool. And I went up to say goodbye and I said, Anne, honey, I got to go into the hospital. And she said, why do you have to go? And I said, I have to go in and take care of sick babies. She's 4 years old. She looks up at me and she says, Mommy, I'm a sick baby too. Oh my God.
I mean, the dagger
out of my chest.
Oh my goodness.
Literally pulled the dagger out of my chest, walked down the stairs, tears down my cheeks, checked out with the nanny and drove off for a 24-hour shift thinking, what am I doing? How do I do this?
Yeah.
So we have some really bad moments.
We do.
Sometimes that medicine is just an angry, angry boss.
Yeah, a jealous mistress in many ways.
Yes. So those are my 2 best stories of paging Dr. Mom.
Well, you have a lot of paging Dr. Mom moments. I mean, both of those are so special. One really showcases your husband stepping in and supporting you, even though there was a time when you felt like he was on easy street and you were suffering. There were ways that he was trying and helping, and I know you delegated a lot to him. And then with your daughter, sometimes there's not an answer. With that story with the strep throat, it's like you really did not have a choice on that. You really had to leave. And you knew she was going to be fine compared to the babies you were taking care of. She was sick, but she wasn't as sick as what you were driving in to take care of. And so I think for moms that are listening who sometimes just get in that pickle of, this is an impossible, I've got an urgent and important situation both at home and at work. How do I do it? I mean, I think sometimes you have to choose. And 9 times out of 10, when you're an ICU doctor, it's going to be your patient. But you also forgave yourself and you also moved on. And it's like a quarterback who has a bad play. If they focus on that play the rest of the game, it ruins the game. You move on. And I think moms just need to remember you're going to have those moments. Whether you probably already had some. If not, you're going to have some. I know we have some residents and med students listening. Get ready for them. They're going to happen. But, you have a bad play and you make a decision. You do the best you can and you move on. And you move on to the next play and the next day. And I think, Susan, after you realize how hard it could be managing all this, you really started taking care of yourself in a way that you learned how to give yourself a clean slate. And you learned how to move on. And that it was all going to be okay. And now you're using it to help other people. And I think that's really almost everyone that I have on, that's their hope, is that maybe some of the suffering I had can help somebody else. And I really think that's what your book is all about. It's like, did you really need to air your dirty laundry about all these things? No. I mean, you wanted to because you knew it could help someone else. And I think that's really powerful. So I feel certain about this, that so many babies were lucky to have a doctor with so much grit. and so much grit that she's willing to put herself out there and to, make herself vulnerable and share with other moms how hard it can be, but also how beautiful and joyous and good it can be and how many people you can help. And I know you're still helping moms. I think you do more general pediatrics than I do on my platform. You're right now, you're helping moms think about COVID and all the different guidelines. And so you continue to help moms. I know you're a grandmother now, and you're seeing motherhood through probably is it your daughter-in-law's eyes and your daughter too?
And that is the best thing, watching your own daughter become a mother. And she said one day, it was another funny mom moment. She said, Catherine's biting her nails and she's 4. Her daughter is 4. And she looked at me and she said, oh, Mom, it's driving me crazy that she's biting her nails. She's got anxiety. What are we going to do? And I said, oh, calm down. It's too early to worry about it, which is probably not what I should have said. But she said, well, when did I start biting my nails? And I went, 4.
That's so funny. And now you're also reassuring your daughter, like, just wait, there'll be bigger fish to fry. Don't worry about the nails. But acknowledging her worry and also just talking through it with her is a gift too. Especially, your grandchildren, they have like the best free nanny in the world. And ICU doctor with 35 years of experience. So the nail biting isn't really your specialty. It's more serious stuff. But you can play to all those strengths. And as a mother and grandmother, I know they have such a gift in you. And just thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. This has been fun talking to you about this. And I love all the good things that you got out of my book.
It was easy.
Oh, it's easy. Thank you. Thank you.
I haven't really looked back on that time. I think I shared with you that when I started residency, I had a 1-year-old. My daughter was born on June 30th. And as anyone listening who has done residency knows, residency starts on July 1st. So I had a 1-day-old when I was supposed to start residency. So I decided to take a year off. So I take the year off and I go to my first rotation with my fresh white coat with the embroidery and my new stethoscope and my new tennis shoes and everything. And I walk into the NICU, which was my first rotation, ironically. I have a lot of intense memories from NICU. So when I was reading your book, they were all flooding back in. Your descriptions are just perfect. But anyway, the resident that was on, she was a 3rd-year resident, very bubbly and outgoing and really sweet. And was a great person to get checkout from. But the last thing she said when she handed me the printed checkout was, I'm so sorry. I was like, why is she apologizing to me? And about the 3rd day in, I figured out, I'm coming off of maternity leave for a year with a newborn, with a 1-year-old at home, and it's my first rotation. And it's pretty overwhelming if you're not an intensivist, which I am not I'm not by nature an intensivist. But anyway, so the NICU, even just the way you described the door clunking in and out, that 2-way door, and the HIPAA and all the memories that I have from the NICU really are so lovely in the book. And if anyone has never worked in a NICU, you're gonna know what it feels like afterwards, because your descriptions are really, really spot on point. So thank you for just giving me that and remembering back to that time, and forgiving myself for leaving my child to go to the NICU, even though that's not what I ended up doing. And then, so many things that you shared that were personal that I think really help other moms realize they're not alone. And so Many Babies is full of helpful advice and actionable ideas that I think any mom could use, especially moms that are doctors. So
thank you, Julie. You're such a sweetheart.
If you like this episode, check out the show notes for helpful links, and make sure to follow so you'll know about what's coming next. Leaving a rating and a review is easy and the best way for others to find out about us. Please follow me on Instagram at Paging Dr. Mom, all spelled out. That's Paging, DOCTOR Mom. And until next time, remember, you're not alone feeling like you're on call 24/7. You're part of a community of women who truly get it.